Imagine walking through the center of Washington, Paris, or London. Majestic buildings, monuments, wide avenues. But look closer. Pentagrams in the street layout, pyramids of glass and stone, all-seeing eyes on the facades. 3 centuries ago, people who believed in secret knowledge left their mark in stone. The Freemasons, a brotherhood of Freemasons, didn't just build buildings. They encoded messages into the very structure of capital cities. Today, we'll walk the streets of 3 cities and read what's hidden in plain sight. Get ready to see familiar places in a whole new light. Masonic symbols surround us in the world's largest capitals. Some see them as evidence of a secret conspiracy. Others see them as simply beautiful architecture. What do you think? Was Washington's layout deliberately designed with Masonic pentagrams? Or is it just a coincidence? Write your opinion in the comments. If you are interested in historical mysteries, hidden symbols, and architectural secrets, subscribe to the channel and like the video. There are many more incredible discoveries ahead. On June 24, 1717, at the Goose and Gridiron Tavern in London, in the courtyard of St. Paul's Cathedral, an event took place that changed the course of world history. 4 Masonic lodges in the capital of the British Empire united to form a new organization, the Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons of London and Westminster. Thus began the era of modern Freemasonry, a brotherhood that would leave its mark on the architecture of the world's largest cities over the course of 3 centuries. The first Grand Master was Anthony Sayers, a man whose name is known today only to historians, but whose actions gave rise to a movement that united kings and commoners, scientists and politicians under the banner of enlightenment and brotherhood. The roots of this phenomenon go back deep into the Middle Ages, to the craft guilds of masons who built Gothic cathedrals throughout Europe. Construction teams kept professional secrets and passed on knowledge through a system of initiation rituals. Master stonemasons created a closed structure with a hierarchy of apprentices, journeymen, and masters. They called each other brothers and developed a system of signs by which they could recognize their fellow craftsmen in any city. These craftsmen possessed unique knowledge of geometry and architecture, which was necessary for the creation of the most complex structures of medieval temples. By the beginning of the 17th century, the guild system began to change in England and Scotland. The Masons' guilds began to accept people who had never laid a stone. Aristocrats, philosophers, and scientists joined the lodges in search of knowledge and communication with like-minded people. Thus, operative masonry, the actual craft of building, was transformed into a speculative, philosophical one. The tools of masons became symbols of spiritual perfection. The compass came to signify the boundaries of reasonable behavior, the square signified the correctness of actions, and the plumb line signified the search for truth. The events of 1717 were the culmination of this process. 4 London lodges decided to create a centralized structure with uniform rituals and rules. This was a revolutionary step for its time. Until then, each lodge had operated independently, with its own traditions and rules. The new Grand Lodge sought to standardize practices and create a unified space for the dissemination of Masonic ideas. The third Grand Master, John Theophilus Desigually, a natural philosopher and clergyman who held this position from 1719 to 1720, made a significant contribution to the development of the organization. Desigually attracted many representatives of the aristocracy and intellectual elite of Britain to the lodges. In 1723, a document appeared that defined the face of Freemasonry for centuries to come: Anderson's Constitution. Presbyterian priest James Anderson compiled a set of rules and the legendary history of the Brotherhood. According to this text, Freemasonry traced its ancestry back to the builders of Solomon's Temple in ancient Jerusalem. The legendary Master Hiram, killed by 3 apprentices for refusing to reveal the secrets of the craft, became a central figure in Masonic mythology. The constitutions established 3 degrees of initiation: apprentice, journeyman, and master. Each degree had its own rituals, signs, and words. The document also proclaimed principles that were revolutionary for the 18th century. Freemasons had to be free men of good character who believed in God, whom they called the Great Architect of the universe. At the same time, specific religious affiliation was irrelevant. Christians of different denominations, Jews, and later Muslims met in the lodges. Political and religious disputes were prohibited at meetings. The lodge was declared a place where people of different views could meet as brothers. The ideas of Freemasonry resonated with the spirit of the Enlightenment. Reason, science, religious tolerance, and brotherhood were values that attracted educated people throughout Europe. By the middle of the 18th century, lodges had appeared in France, Germany, Italy, and Russia. In each country, the movement acquired national characteristics but retained a common symbolic basis. Freemasons created libraries, financed scientific research, and engaged in charity work. They believed that enlightenment and moral improvement would change the world for the better. Across the ocean, in the North American colonies of Britain, Freemasonry found particularly fertile ground. Here, in the new lands, a society was being built that was free from the feudal remnants of old Europe. The ideals of brotherhood and equality formed the basis of the future republic. But could the founders of Freemasonry in 1717 have imagined that their symbols would be woven into the very fabric of the capital of the world's greatest power? Enter any Masonic lodge in the world, and you will see them: the compass and square, the ancient tools of builders, transformed into sacred symbols. These 2 objects, most often depicted together, have become the hallmark of the Brotherhood of Freemasons. But what do they really mean, beyond conspiracy theories and Hollywood movies? The compass, a tool for drawing circles and measuring distances, symbolizes the heavens, infinity, and the spiritual realm. It represents the Mason's striving for perfection, the ability to define the boundaries of his behavior and remain within moral norms. In Masonic philosophy, the compass serves as a reminder that there are boundaries that should not be crossed. The square, a tool for checking right angles in construction, represents the earth, the material world, and practical activity. It symbolizes honesty, straightforwardness, and correctness of action. Freemasons interpret the square as a reminder of the need to align their behavior with moral principles. Together, these instruments form a unity of the earthly and the heavenly, the material and the spiritual. The mutual arrangement of the compass and the square has a profound meaning. In the first degree of initiation, apprentice, the square lies on top of the compass, symbolizing the predominance of the material principle. In the second degree, journeyman, one end of the compass is freed, showing spiritual growth. In the third degree, master, both ends of the compass are free, signifying the achievement of balance between the spiritual and the material. In English-speaking countries, The letter G is often placed between the compass and the square. This letter is attributed with various meanings. The most common interpretation links it to the English word God, reminding Freemasons of the presence of the great architect of the universe at the center of their teachings. Another interpretation refers to the word geometry, which Freemasons consider the noblest of sciences and the basis of all existence. For Freemasons, geometry is not just a branch of mathematics, but sacred knowledge that allows them to understand the structure of the universe. The all-seeing eye is another symbol inextricably linked to Freemasonry. This image represents an eye enclosed in a triangle and surrounded by rays of light. The triangle, called the radiant delta, symbolizes divine providence. The eye represents the omnipresence of the Creator, who watches over the work of Freemasons and everything that happens in the world. Physically, the all-seeing eye represents the sun, the source of light and life. Spiritually, it symbolizes the great architect of the universe. This symbol is placed in the east of each lodge during ritual meetings. The symbolic composition is intended to remind each Mason of his personal star, which illuminates his life path and helps him in his trials. The all-seeing eye is also associated with clairvoyance and the ability to see intuitively, to penetrate the essence of things beyond the obvious. Columns are the most important architectural element of Masonic symbolism. Two columns named Jachin and Boaz are installed in each lodge. According to biblical tradition, these were the names of the pillars at the entrance to Solomon's temple. The right column, Jachin, means "he shall establish," and the left column, Boaz, means "in him is strength." These columns symbolize the stability and strength of Masonic teachings. They also represent the duality of the universe: light and darkness, masculine and feminine, strength and beauty. Every initiate passes between the columns, symbolically crossing from the world of the profane to the world of the initiated. The five-pointed star, or pentagram, occupies a special place in Masonic symbolism. Its 5 points represent the 5 points of perfection, the virtues that a Master Mason must possess. These points are also associated with the 5 parts of the human body: the head, 2 arms, and 2 legs. The letter G, or a flaming star, is often depicted in the center of the pentagram. This symbol reminds us of the pursuit of the light of knowledge and of man as a microcosm reflecting the macrocosm of the universe. Acacia is a plant mentioned in the legend of Hiram. According to legend, the murderers buried the master's body and marked the spot with an acacia branch. When the body was found, it was the acacia that pointed to the grave. Since then, this plant has symbolized the immortality of the soul and rebirth. Acacia leaves are used in third-degree initiation rituals. The tree itself is associated with purity and innocence, and its unfading greenery with the eternal life of the spirit. A checkered floor is a characteristic feature of Masonic lodge decor. Alternating black and white squares symbolize the duality of existence, the opposites that make up life: good and evil, joy and sorrow, life and death. The checkerboard pattern reminds Freemasons of the need to maintain balance without leaning toward either extreme. It is also a symbol of how harmony is born from opposites, just as black and white squares form a single pattern. The plumb line, level, and trowel are practical tools of the Mason that have taken on symbolic meaning. The plumb line symbolizes straightforwardness and honesty, the pursuit of truth. It reminds us that a Mason must be unwavering in his principles. The level signifies the equality of all brothers, regardless of social status. In the lodge, all are equal. The trowel, which is used to apply and level the mortar between the stones, symbolizes the brotherly love that binds the members of the lodge together. The sun and moon are often depicted in the eastern part of the lodge. The sun represents the master of the lodge, who directs the work, just as the sun governs the day. The moon symbolizes the first guard, the master's assistant. These celestial bodies also remind us of the cyclical nature of time, the change of day and night, the eternal movement of the cosmos according to the laws established by the great architect. All these symbols are united by a common idea: the path to perfection through knowledge and work. Freemasons believed that symbolic language allows truths to be conveyed that cannot be expressed in ordinary words. Each sign is a lesson, each image a reminder of higher goals. And they left these signs everywhere they had power and influence. Masonic symbolism was particularly evident in the architecture and layout of cities. Is it possible to accidentally discover a pentagram in the street network of the capital? In 1790, the United States Congress made a decision that determined the appearance of the future capital of the young republic. It was decided to build a new city on the banks of the Potomac River, on the border between Maryland and Virginia. Until then, the government had moved between different cities: Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore. The creation of a special capital was intended to symbolize the independence and unity of the new state. The choice of location was not accidental. This area was located approximately halfway between the northern and southern states, which was intended to moderate regional rivalries. President George Washington personally oversaw the process of selecting the site and planning the city. He invited French military engineer Pierre-Charles L'Enfant to create the project. This architect, who had arrived in America during the War of Independence, had a European education and a grand vision. L'Enfant dreamed of creating a capital that could rival the great cities of Europe: Paris, Rome, London. In 1791, L'Enfant presented his grand plan. It was a system of wide avenues intersecting at various angles and creating open spaces for monumental buildings. The French architect designed the city as a giant chessboard, overlaid with a diagonal grid of avenues named after states. At the intersections of the streets, there were to be squares and circles decorated with fountains, monuments, and sculptures. L'Enfant's plan was based on two key points: Capitol Hill, where the Congress building was to be located, and the president's residence, the future White House. The main arteries of the city radiated out from these centers of power. The wide avenues not only created spectacular vistas, but also had practical significance. They allowed troops to be moved quickly in case of unrest, which was an important consideration after the recent experience of the Revolution. The National Mall, stretching from the Capitol to the Potomac River, became the central axis of the composition. This huge esplanade, more than 3 kilometers long, was intended for parades, celebrations, and the placement of the nation's main symbols. L'Enfant envisioned it surrounded by public buildings, museums, and monuments. The architect himself called his project a city of magnificent distances. Indeed, the scale of the idea was staggering. Many contemporaries considered the plan overly ambitious for a young republic with a population of less than 4 million. However, the French engineer and his American patrons were thinking centuries ahead. They were creating a capital not for the few thousand inhabitants of the time, but for a future great power. Lafront's collaboration with President Washington was intense, but short-lived. The Frenchman had a difficult personality and clashed with the city's construction commission. In 1792, he was dismissed from his position as chief architect. The plan was finalized by surveyor Andrew Ellicott, who made numerous changes, simplifying and reducing the cost of the project. Nevertheless, L'Enfant's basic concept remained intact and determined the structure of the city. On December 1, 1800, the capital officially moved to the new city, named after the first president. By that time, only a few government buildings and about 300 private houses had been built. Most of the territory was swampy with sparse buildings. The roads were washed away by rain, and wild nature approached the very thresholds of official residences. Contemporaries described the early capital as a city of magnificent intentions. The plan was grand, but its implementation left much to be desired. Construction proceeded slowly due to a lack of funds and labor. Most of the heavy work was done by slaves, which was a sad irony for the capital of a country that had proclaimed freedom and equality. The War of 1812 brought destruction to the city. British troops burned down the Capitol, the White House, and many other buildings. It took years to rebuild. It was not until the mid-19th century that Washington began to take on the appearance envisioned by L'Enfant. Monumental buildings were constructed, parks were laid out, and monuments were erected. The city became a symbol of the American nation, where every street and every square carried an ideological message. The peculiarity of Washington's layout has attracted the attention of researchers since the 19th century. Diagonal avenues crossing a rectangular grid of streets formed complex geometric figures. In the 20th century, works appeared claiming that Masonic symbols, pentagrams, hexagrams, compasses, and set squares, were encrypted in the city's plan. Skeptics dismiss these theories as the result of an overactive imagination, seeing patterns where none exist. Proponents point to specific configurations of streets and buildings. How valid are the claims about the Masonic nature of Washington's layout? The fact remains that both President Washington and many other founding fathers of the United States were Masons. Pierre L'Enfant was not a member of the Brotherhood, but he worked on behalf of people deeply involved in the Masonic movement. Knowledge of geometry and symbolism was an integral part of an architect's education at that time. Could this knowledge have been embodied in the city plan? On September 20th, 1793, a ceremony was held to lay the cornerstone of the Capitol, the main building of the future capital. The ritual was conducted according to Masonic rites. President George Washington, dressed in a Masonic cape, and the regalia of the Master of Alexandria Lodge No. 22, laid the stone with a special silver trowel. A procession of Masons in full regalia marched through the streets of the city. This public display of Masonic symbolism at the founding of the Capitol cannot be denied. It is recorded in numerous documents and engravings of the time. Washington was built by people for whom the symbolic language of geometry and architecture was a natural way of expressing ideas. The city was conceived as the embodiment of enlightened principles of reason and order. Could its creators resist the temptation to weave into its structure the signs of their brotherhood, visible only to the initiated? Or are these just coincidences, born of the peculiarities of the radial ring layout? The answer depends on how closely we are willing to look at the lines on the map. But before analyzing the geometry of the streets, it is worth understanding who the people who created this capital were. What role did Freemasonry play in the lives of the founding fathers of the United States? On April 28, 1789, an event took place on the balcony of Federal Hall in New York City that changed the course of world history. George Washington, Commander-in-Chief of the Revolutionary Army that defeated the greatest empire of its time, was sworn in as the first President of the United States of America. Many in the crowd gathered on Wall Street knew the secret that united most of the founding fathers of the new state. Washington was a Freemason. Moreover, he belonged to the highest ranks of the Brotherhood and openly wore Masonic symbols at public ceremonies. George Washington's initiation into the Brotherhood took place in 1752 in Fredericksburg, Virginia, when the future president was only 20 years old. The young surveyor from a family of Virginia planters quickly rose through the ranks of initiation. By the age of 22, he had already become a Master Mason. In 1788, Washington was elected Master of the Alexandria No. 22 Lodge, which still exists today. For Washington, Freemasonry was not a formal membership in a fashionable club. He regularly attended lodge meetings, participated in rituals, and corresponded with brothers from other cities and countries. Numerous letters have been preserved in which Washington discusses Masonic affairs, thanks people for sending him aprons and regalia, and recommends candidates for initiation. He believed in the values of brotherhood, enlightenment, religious tolerance, and moral improvement. These ideas permeated his political thinking and influenced the formation of the principles of the new republic. At his inauguration ceremony, Washington took the oath of office on a Bible belonging to St. John's Lodge No. 1 in New York. This book was specially delivered for the ceremony when it was discovered that the organizers had forgotten to provide a Holy Scripture. The choice of a Masonic Bible for the first presidential oath in U.S. history is a symbolic gesture whose significance cannot be overestimated. It demonstrated the new state's connection with the ideals of enlightened Freemasonry. After the ceremony, the procession moved to St. Paul's Chapel, where a Thanksgiving service was held. Among the participants in the procession were numerous Masons in full regalia. Washington was not the only Freemason among the founders of the United States. Benjamin Franklin, the man whose portrait adorns the $100 bill, became a Freemason at the age of 25. In 1731, he was initiated into St. John's Lodge in Philadelphia. By 1735, Franklin already held the position of Grand Master of Pennsylvania. For a man of such universal genius as Franklin, Freemasonry was a natural environment. Here, the scientist, inventor, publisher, and politician found like-minded people who shared his passion for knowledge and the improvement of society. Franklin was actively involved in the Masonic movement throughout his life. While serving as ambassador in Paris, he became a member of the famous Nine Sisters Lodge, which brought together the intellectual elite of France. This lodge included Voltaire, the mathematician Lalande, and the sculptor Goudon. Franklin's Masonic connections played an important role in gaining French support for the American Revolution. Through his fraternal connections, he established contacts with influential people in the French court and society. Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence and third President of the United States, may have been a Freemason, although there is no direct documentary evidence of his initiation. However, his ideas about natural human rights, the separation of church and state, and the importance of education were fully consistent with the Masonic philosophy of the Enlightenment. Jefferson maintained friendly relations with many prominent Freemasons and never criticized the Brotherhood. Of the 56 people who signed the Declaration of Independence, at least 9 were definitely Freemasons, and there is plausible evidence that several dozen more were. 13 of the 39 framers of the U.S. Constitution were Masons, including George Washington. The first 5 presidents of the United States had connections to Freemasonry. In addition to Washington, James Monroe and Andrew Jackson were Masons. These statistics are not coincidental. In the 18th century, American society was relatively small, especially its educated elite. Masonic lodges served as a meeting place for people with similar interests and values. Here, not only rituals and philosophy were discussed, but also politics, science, and literature. The lodges were a kind of club for the enlightened aristocracy and the rising bourgeoisie, where ideas were formed that later materialized in the creation of a new state. Masonic principles of brotherhood, equality, and freedom of conscience were directly reflected in the founding documents of the United States. The First Amendment to the Constitution, guaranteeing freedom of religion, echoes the Masonic principle of religious tolerance. The idea that all people are created equal, proclaimed in the Declaration of Independence, corresponds to the Masonic teaching of the equality of brothers in the lodge, regardless of social status. The Great Seal of the United States, adopted in 1782, contains elements that some researchers associate with Masonic symbolism. The reverse side of the seal depicts an unfinished pyramid of 13 levels, crowned with an all-seeing eye in a triangle. The official interpretation is that the pyramid symbolizes strength and longevity. The 13 levels represent the original states, and the eye represents divine providence. However, the similarity to Masonic symbols is obvious. The pyramid is an ancient image associated in Masonic tradition with Egyptian mysteries. The all-seeing eye in a triangle is a central Masonic symbol called the Radiant Delta. The creators of the seal, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson, were well versed in this symbolic language. However, disputes about the Masonic influence on the Great Seal continue. Defenders of the official version point out that the all-seeing eye was a widespread Christian symbol long before the emergence of Freemasonry. Indeed, the divine eye adorned temples and icons throughout Europe since the Middle Ages. Critics argue that context matters when this symbol is placed on the state seal by people, most of whom were Freemasons. It is naive to ignore this connection. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. The Founding Fathers used universal symbols that were understandable to the general public, but for them, these images carried additional Masonic meaning. They created a multi-layered message, one for all citizens, another for initiated brothers. This approach was typical of 18th century people who grew up in a culture where symbolism played a much greater role than it does today. The Masonic influence on the creation of the United States is a historical fact that does not require conspiracy theories. It was not a secret operation to seize power, but a natural embodiment of the ideas of the Enlightenment by people who sincerely believed in these principles. They built a state that, in their opinion, was to become a beacon of freedom and reason in the world. And they engraved their beliefs in stone and paper, in laws and architecture. But how deeply have Masonic symbols penetrated the structure of the Capitol? Take a map of central Washington and look closely at the configuration of the streets north of the White House. Pennsylvania Avenue, Connecticut Avenue, Vermont Avenue, New York Avenue, and Massachusetts Avenue are 5 wide diagonal avenues that intersect and form a complex geometric figure. Connect the points where they intersect, and you will see an almost perfect 5-pointed star with its tip pointing south, directly toward the presidential residence. Coincidence or intentional design? This question has intrigued researchers for over a century. The pentagram, a 5-pointed star, is one of humanity's oldest geometric symbols. In Masonic tradition, it is called the flaming star and symbolizes the creator man striving for perfection. The 5 rays represent the 5 points of craftsmanship, the 5 virtues of the initiate. The letter G is often placed in the center of the star, symbolizing the great architect of the universe. For Freemasons of the 18th and 19th centuries, the pentagram was as recognizable a sign of brotherhood as the compass and square. Its image adorned lodges, aprons, and ritual objects. If the creators of Washington really wanted to leave a Masonic mark on the city's layout, the pentagram would have been a natural choice. Critics of this theory point out that the human brain tends to find patterns even where there are none. By connecting arbitrary points on a map, you can get a variety of geometric shapes. A radial ring layout with diagonal avenues inevitably creates complex intersections. Seeing hidden symbols in them is apophenia, the tendency to find meaning in random data. However, supporters of the Masonic version offer specific arguments. The northern tip of the pentagram is marked by the intersection of Connecticut Avenue and Vermont Avenue at Logan Circle. The eastern tip is at the intersection of Massachusetts Avenue and New York Avenue at Mount Vernon Square. The western point is the intersection of Pennsylvania Avenue and New Hampshire Avenue at Washington Circle. The southeast and southwest points are formed by the intersections of other avenues. All these points are marked by squares or parks, which emphasizes their urban significance. The southern point of the pentagram points directly to the White House, the residence of the head of state. Moreover, researchers have discovered that north of the White House, it is possible to draw not only a pentagram, but also a hexagram, a 6-pointed star composed of 2 triangles. The hexagram, known as the Star of David in Jewish tradition or the Seal of Solomon in esoteric tradition, also has significance in Masonic symbolism. It represents the unity of opposites, the harmony of the spiritual and material worlds. In some Masonic systems, the hexagram symbolizes the perfect Mason who has achieved a balance between the upper triangle of the divine and the lower triangle of the earthly. The combination of the pentagram and the hexagram creates a particularly complex symbolic composition. These 2 figures intersect, creating a single geometric pattern with the White House as the focal point. If this was indeed intended by the architects, then we have before us an example of an urban planning message of astonishing sophistication. The Capitol becomes a giant Masonic lodge under the open sky, where every street is a line of sacred geometry. Some researchers see an additional element of Masonic symbolism in the configuration of the streets, which form a compass and a square, the main emblem of the Brotherhood. Louisiana Avenue and Maryland Avenue, diverging from the Capitol to the southwest and southeast, form 2 sides of the square. Massachusetts Avenue and Connecticut Avenue, converging on the White House, create the lines of the compass. The White House is located at the point where the ends of the compass would meet if the lines were continued. This interpretation requires a certain amount of imagination. The lines are not absolutely accurate. and many other streets must be ignored. Nevertheless, the overall configuration does resemble the familiar Masonic emblem. The orientation of the geometric figures is of particular interest. In Masonic tradition, great importance is attached to the cardinal directions. Lodges are oriented from east to west, mirroring the movement of the sun. The master of the lodge sits in the east, where the light comes from. The U.S. Capitol is located on the eastern side of the National Mall, and the White House is on the northern side. The Washington Monument stands at the intersection of the east-west and north-south axes, forming a kind of cosmic center of the city. This deliberate orientation may reflect Masonic ideas about sacred geography. Mathematical analysis of Washington's layout reveals the use of the golden ratio, the ratio of 1 to 618 to 1. This ratio, known to the ancient Greeks and considered the embodiment of perfect harmony, was actively used in Masonic architecture. The distances between key points in the city, the angles of intersection of avenues, and the sizes of squares demonstrate the repeated application of this ratio. For 18th-century architects who studied classical geometry, the golden ratio was a natural tool. For Freemasons, this number had additional symbolic meaning, linking earthly architecture with the divine harmony of the cosmos. Skeptics point to an important fact. Pierre Lafont, who created the city plan, was not a Freemason. There is no documentary evidence of his membership in the Brotherhood. Therefore, it is unreasonable to attribute the deliberate creation of Masonic symbolism in the layout to him. However, this logic does not take into account several points. First, Le Feuillon worked directly for President Washington, a convinced Freemason. He could have received specific instructions regarding geometry and symbolism. Second, any educated architect of the time was familiar with the language of classical geometry, including pentagrams and the golden ratio. These elements were part of the professional toolkit. Third, L'Enfant's plan was refined by others, including surveyor Andrew Ellicott, who was a Freemason. The final configuration of the streets took decades to develop, with the participation of many architects and urban planners, most of whom had connections to the Brotherhood. There is another level of interpretation. Even if specific geometric figures were not consciously planned, the very approach to urban planning reflected the Masonic worldview. The idea of creating an ideal city based on rational geometry, where streets form regular shapes and buildings are arranged according to mathematical proportions, is the embodiment of the Enlightenment belief in reason and order. Freemasons saw themselves as spiritual architects, building a temple of humanity according to the plans of the great architect of the universe. Washington became the material embodiment of this idea, the temple city of the new republic. Regardless of whether the pentagrams and hexagrams were deliberately incorporated into the city plan or arose as a side effect of the radial layout, their very presence created a powerful symbolic reality. Generations of Freemasons could see in the outlines of the Capitol confirmation of their influence on the fate of the nation. And conspiracy theorists received inexhaustible material for theories about a secret government. The truth, as usual, is more complex than any one-sided interpretation. Washington was created by people of a certain cultural and intellectual milieu. For them, geometry was not just a technical discipline, but a language of higher truths. The symbols were not deliberately hidden, but they were not flaunted either. They were a natural part of the worldview of the creators. A modern observer may see anything they want in the layout, or see nothing special at all. But for an 18th century person familiar with symbolic thinking, the message would have been obvious. The geometry of the streets is only one aspect of the Masonic presence in the capital. Much more obvious signs can be found in the architecture of specific buildings and monuments. The most grandiose of these towers over the city, at a height of 169 meters, the Washington Monument, a snow-white obelisk towering over the U.S. Capitol, is the tallest stone structure in the world. Its construction took almost 40 years and was imbued with Masonic symbolism from the first stone to the final aluminum capstone. This monument to the first president also became a monument to the Brotherhood of Freemasons and their role in the creation of the American nation. The history of the monument began in 1833, when a group of citizens created the Washington National Monument Society. The goal was to erect a grand memorial worthy of the man who is called the Father of the Nation. A design competition was held. The winner was architect Robert Mills, who proposed a giant obelisk 183 meters high, surrounded by a colonnade with 30 columns. The obelisk is an ancient Egyptian symbol of a sunbeam frozen in stone. This form was popular in Masonic architecture in the 18th and 19th centuries. Freemasons considered themselves the heirs of the ancient mysteries of Egypt, the keepers of the secret knowledge of the priests and builders of the pyramids. Obelisks were erected in front of the entrances to Masonic temples, adorned Masonic cemeteries, and were depicted on ritual objects. The choice of this particular form for the monument to Washington, a Mason, was symbolic. On July 4, 1848, a solemn ceremony was held to lay the cornerstone of the monument. The date was chosen deliberately, the 72nd anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. The ritual was conducted according to the Masonic rites of the Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia. 20,000 people gathered to witness the event. A procession of Masons in full regalia marched from the Capitol to the construction site on National Mall. At the head of the procession was the very same silver trowel with which George Washington had laid the cornerstone of the Capitol 55 years earlier. The ceremony was presided over by Benjamin French, Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia. The cornerstone was laid according to an ancient Masonic ritual using corn, wine, and oil, symbols of abundance, joy, and peace. The stone was anointed with oil, sprinkled with wine, and sprinkled with grain. The Grand Master recited the ritual words, proclaiming the stone well-formed, true, and reliable. A time capsule containing various items, a copy of the Constitution, coins, and newspapers from that day, was placed in the stone. Among the artifacts were Masonic documents and relics, including George Washington's Bible. The Masonic nature of the ceremony was not hidden. On the contrary, it was the central element of the celebration. Newspapers described the ritual in detail, listed the participating lodges, and praised the role of Freemasonry in the history of the nation. In the mid-19th century, American society's attitude toward the Brotherhood was generally positive. Freemasons were perceived as patriots and philanthropists, heirs to the Founding Fathers. Construction proceeded slowly. Money was collected by subscription, and work was carried out intermittently. By 1854, the obelisk had reached a height of about 46 meters, when an incident occurred that halted construction for 23 years. Pope Pius IX sent a stone from the Temple of Concord in Rome as a gift to the monument. This gesture provoked the fury of the anti-Catholic and anti-Masonic Ignoramuses Party, which was gaining strength in American politics. On the night of March 9, 1854, a group of radicals stole the papal stone and presumably threw it into the Potomac River. Members of the Know Nothing Party then seized control of the Monument Society and added several rows of poor-quality masonry before funds ran out completely. The Civil War between the North and the South, which lasted from 1861 to 1865, pushed the issue of the monument into the background. The unfinished stump of the obelisk stood as a symbol of a divided nation. After the war, it took time to rebuild the country. It was not until 1876, on the centennial of independence, that Congress decided to resume construction with public funds. The project was led by Army engineer Thomas Casey. He found that the foundation was too weak for the planned height and demanded that it be reinforced. Work began again in 1879. Casey abandoned the original plan with a colonnade, focusing on the obelisk itself. Construction proceeded at a rapid pace. In 5 years, more than 100 meters were added to the height. An attentive observer may notice a change in the shade of the marble cladding at a height of about 46 meters. This is the boundary between the masonry of 1848-1854 and 1879-1884. Stone from different quarries has slightly different colors. On December 6, 1884, the obelisk was completed. An aluminum tip weighing 2 kilograms and 800 grams was installed at the top. At that time, aluminum was a rare and expensive metal, valued more than silver. The choice of this material emphasized the prestige of the monument. The edges of the cap are engraved with the Latin inscription, "Praise God," and the names of the people who participated in its construction. The final height was 169.2 meters, making it the tallest structure in the world at that time. On February 21, 1885, George Washington's birthday, the official opening ceremony took place. Unlike the laying of the first stone, this event was not a Masonic ritual. By the end of the 19th century, anti-Masonic sentiment in American society had intensified. The organizers preferred a secular ceremony. Nevertheless, many participants were Masons, and brothers across the country were proud that the monument to America's greatest Mason was laid and built with the active participation of the Brotherhood. Inside the obelisk are 193 memorial stones donated by various states, cities, organizations, and foreign countries. Among them are stones from Masonic lodges from all corners of the country. These slabs, engraved with compasses, squares, all-seeing eyes, and other symbols, transform the interior of the monument into a kind of Masonic gallery. Climbing the stairs to the top, visitors pass by these testimonies to the Masonic presence in American history. The symbolism of the obelisk goes beyond its form. At 169 meters high, it is visible from anywhere in central Washington. The monument serves as the city's focal point, from which coordinates are measured. It stands at the intersection of a line running east from the Capitol and a line running south from the White House. This cross-shaped composition creates the cosmic center of the Capitol, the point where the axes of power intersect. In Masonic tradition, such a center is called the umbilical cord, the navel of the earth, the place of connection between the heavenly and earthly worlds. On a clear day, the sunlight reflecting off the white marble of the obelisk creates a dazzling glow. The monument literally shines like a beacon. At night, artificial lighting is turned on, making the obelisk visible for miles around. This play of light is deeply symbolic for Freemasons, who consider light to be a metaphor for knowledge and enlightenment. The Washington obelisk is not just a monument to the president. It is a Masonic symbol of colossal proportions, forever etched in the landscape of the Capitol. It proclaims the connection between the first president, the brotherhood of Freemasons, and the destiny of the American nation. And it stands in the center of the city, where every building tells its own story about the people who built the Republic. On September 18, 1793, an unusual procession gathered in the marshy terrain of the future U.S. Capitol. President George Washington, dressed in full Masonic regalia, presided over the ceremony to lay the cornerstone of the Capitol, the seat of Congress. An artillery salute heralded the beginning of the ritual that was to consecrate the birth of the main temple of American democracy. More than 1,000 people, including representatives of all Masonic lodges in Maryland and Virginia, witnessed this moment. The Masons walked in a solemn procession to the sounds of a military band, carrying the banners, regalia, and ritual objects of their brotherhood. President Washington was dressed in a leather apron embroidered with Masonic symbols, the very one that had been presented to him by his brothers from the French Lodge as a sign of respect. A silver trowel, specially made for the ceremony, gleamed in his hands. The cornerstone was a massive block of marble weighing about 600 kilograms. A silver plate was affixed to it with an inscription recording the date and participants of the ceremony. Washington struck the stone 3 times with the trowel, a ritual gesture signifying a call to order and attention in Masonic tradition. The stone was then anointed with oil, sprinkled with wine, and sprinkled with grain, 3 ancient Masonic symbols representing peace, joy, and abundance. Grain symbolizes the generosity of nature and hope for a good harvest. Wine signifies joy and spiritual refreshment. Oil represents purity, enlightenment, and anointing for service. These elements date back to biblical times and the consecration ceremonies of Solomon's Temple, the mythical origin of the Masonic tradition. Grand Master of the Maryland Lodge, Joseph Clark recited a ritual prayer, asking the great architect of the universe to bless the building and the nation. The choir sang the Masonic anthem. The brothers present responded with the traditional exclamation, "So be it," 3 times, representing a 3-fold confirmation of the truth. After the ritual was completed, the procession moved back to the city, where a solemn banquet was held. Washington gave a speech in which he expressed his hope that the new building would become a place of wise governance and service to the people. He did not explicitly mention Freemasonry, but used symbolic language characteristic of the Brotherhood about construction, foundations, and the erection of a Temple of Liberty. The ceremony of 1793 was not secret. On the contrary, it was widely covered in the press. Newspapers described the Masonic ritual in detail, listed the participating lodges, and published engravings of the procession. For contemporaries, the connection between Freemasonry and the creation of a new state was obvious and did not cause any confusion. The Brotherhood was perceived as a patriotic organization uniting the best citizens of the Republic. The construction of the Capitol took decades. The building was erected in stages, survived a fire during the War of 1812, and was completed and rebuilt. It did not acquire its final appearance with its recognizable central dome until the 1860s. But Masonic participation was not limited to laying the cornerstone. Many of the architects and builders who worked on the Capitol were members of the Brotherhood. The first architect was William Thornton, a physician and amateur inventor who won the design competition. Thornton was a Freemason and designed a building full of classical proportions and symmetry characteristic of Masonic aesthetics. The next chief architect was Benjamin Latrobe, a professional architect who oversaw the restoration after the fire of 1814. Latrobe brought elements of the Greek Revival to the Capitol's design, creating columns with capitals shaped like corn cobs and tobacco leaves, an American variation on classical orders. Although there is no direct evidence of Latrobe's Masonic affiliation, his architectural language and connections suggest a closeness to the Brotherhood. Charles Bulfinch, who designed the central dome, was definitely a Freemason. His work completed the main structure of the building by 1827. The 30-meter-high dome was crowned with a statue, but this original wooden structure was later replaced. Between 1856 and 1863, architect Thomas Walter created a new, much more grandiose cast-iron dome, 88 meters high. A bronze statue of Liberty by sculptor Thomas Crawford was installed at its top. An interesting detail is that the statue was originally supposed to wear a Phrygian cap, a symbol of freed slaves in ancient Rome. However, Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, future President of the Confederacy and defender of slavery, demanded that the design be changed. Instead, Liberty was given a helmet with eagle feathers. On December 2, 1863, a ceremony was held to install the statue on the dome. Once again, it was a Masonic ritual. The Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia consecrated the completed Capitol. President Abraham Lincoln, whose position on Freemasonry remains a subject of debate, attended the ceremony. A 35-gun salute, representing the number of states, marked the erection of the statue. The Grand Master gave a speech about the symbolism of the completed dome as a heavenly vault over the Temple of Democracy. The interior decoration of the Capitol contains many elements that can be interpreted as Masonic symbols or references. The rotunda under the dome, a circular central space with a diameter of 30 meters, was designed after the Roman Pantheon. In Masonic tradition, the circle symbolizes eternity and perfection. The dome's painting by Constantino Brumidi, The Apotheosis of Washington, depicts the first president ascending to heaven surrounded by allegorical figures and gods. The composition resembles Masonic images of the soul's ascent to the great architect of the universe. Washington is depicted between liberty and victory, dressed in purple, a color associated with royal dignity and the highest degrees of Freemasonry. 13 maidens symbolizing the original states are arranged around the central group. The outer circle contains 6 groups of figures representing war, science, maritime affairs, trade, mechanics, and agriculture. These allegories correspond to the Masonic ideal of the harmonious development of all aspects of civilization under the guidance of enlightened reason. The science group depicts Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom, teaching Benjamin Franklin, Robert Fulton, and Samuel Morse. Franklin was known to be a prominent Freemason. The statue holds a book and points to an electric generator, symbols of knowledge and progress, central values of Freemasonry. The frieze of the rotunda, encircling the interior wall, depicts key scenes from American history, from the arrival of Columbus to the flight of the Wright brothers. Several panels directly depict Masonic ceremonies. One scene depicts President Washington laying the cornerstone of the Capitol itself in Masonic regalia. Another shows Pocahontas being baptized as Rebecca, a name of special significance in the Masonic system of orders for women associated with Freemasons. The National Statuary Hall in the Capitol contains sculptures of prominent Americans sent by each state. Many of those depicted were Masons, and some statues show them with Masonic attributes. The statue of Sam Houston, a Texas hero, depicts him holding a cane with a Masonic symbol. The sculpture of Roger Williams, founder of Rhode Island, shows a book open to a page with text about religious freedom, a central Masonic value. Beneath the Capitol is a crypt, originally intended as the burial place of George Washington. This circular room with 40 sandstone columns forms a symbolic forest of pillars, reminiscent of the interior of a Masonic lodge. In the center of the crypt is a brass star marking the point from which all addresses in Washington are measured. It is the umbilical cord of the city, its sacred center. Although Washington's body was never transferred to the Capitol, the empty tomb remains a symbolic center under which the spirit of the nation rests. The Capitol is not just a government building. It is a temple of American civil religion, where the Founding Fathers are revered as saints and the Constitution as a sacred text. This temple was consecrated by Masonic rituals at key moments in its creation. The Masons saw this as confirmation of their role as the spiritual architects of the Republic. Critics saw it as an attempt by a secret society to usurp national symbols. But the fact remains that the heart of American democracy was laid by people in Masonic aprons. Traces of this brotherhood can be found not only in Washington. Across the ocean, in London, there is a building that does not hide but proudly proclaims its Masonic essence. In the very center of London, on Great Queen Street in the Covent Garden area, stands a monumental building made of Portland stone. Its majestic Art Deco facade is decorated with columns and bas-reliefs. Above the entrance, the words Freemasons Hall are inscribed in gold letters. This is not a secret headquarters hidden in basements or behind anonymous doors. It is an open proclamation of the presence of Freemasonry in the capital of the British Empire. The building serves as the headquarters of the United Grand Lodge of England, the oldest Grand Lodge in the world, and the parent organization of modern Freemasonry. It was from here in 1717 that the movement that changed Western civilization began to spread. The current building is the third on this site. The first Freemasons Hall was built in 1776 to a design by architect Thomas Sandby. It was a relatively modest structure, housing one large lodge and several meeting rooms. As the Masonic movement grew in Britain, more spacious premises were needed. In 1828-1831, a second hall was built, much more impressive, with a neoclassical facade and a large temple room. This building served the Freemasons for almost a century. However, by the beginning of the 20th century, it had become too small for the growing number of lodges. After World War I, the United Grand Lodge decided to erect a memorial building in memory of the Freemasons who had died in the conflict. More than 3,000 British Freemasons gave their lives in the war of 1914-1918. The new hall was to perpetuate their memory and at the same time become a worthy headquarters for the world's leading Masonic organization. Architects Henry Hall and Alfred Hoare designed a grand Art Deco complex with elements of neoclassicism. Construction began in 1927 on the site of the old building. The work was carried out in stages so that Masonic activities could continue. The new Freemasons Hall opened on July 19, 1933. The Duke of Connaught, Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge, conducted a solemn consecration ceremony according to Masonic ritual. Thousands of Freemasons from across the country arrived for the celebration. The building is impressive in scale. The facade stretches 60 meters along Great Queen Street. The main portal is framed by two massive pylons of polished granite. The bronze doors, over 5 meters high, are decorated with bas-reliefs featuring Masonic symbols. Above the entrance is the emblem of the United Grand Lodge, two compasses crossed over an open Bible, surrounded by a ribbon with the motto, Uvi Moya Spes Mea. Hear me, my hope. Inside is a veritable labyrinth of corridors, staircases, and rooms for various purposes. The complex includes a library with a valuable collection of Masonic literature, a museum with artifacts dating back to the 18th century, administrative offices, dining rooms, cloakrooms, and, of course, temple halls for rituals. In total, there are 23 temples of various sizes in the building, from small rooms for private lodges to the grandiose Grand Temple. The Grand Temple is the heart of the complex and one of the most impressive ritual spaces in the world. The hall can accommodate 1,100 people. Its dimensions are staggering: 37 meters long, 27 meters wide, and 19 meters high to the ceiling. Upon entering the temple, visitors find themselves in a space where every detail is imbued with symbolism. The ceiling is a coffered vault of sky blue color, studded with golden stars. This symbolizes the heavenly dome under which the Mason works. In the center of the ceiling shines a huge gilded radiant delta, the all-seeing eye in a triangle, surrounded by radiance. The eye seems to gaze upon everything that happens in the temple, reminding us of the omnipresence of the great architect of the universe. The rays diverge in all directions, illuminating the hall with divine light. The floor is laid out in a black and white checkerboard pattern of marble mosaic, a classic Masonic symbol of the duality of existence. The squares are perfectly equal and create a hypnotic geometric pattern. The central part of the hall is surrounded by a colonnade of 12 massive columns supporting the second-tier gallery. The columns are made in a simplified classical style characteristic of Art Deco. Each column represents one of the months of the year, symbolizing the passage of time and the cyclical nature of the cosmos. On the eastern wall of the temple, opposite the entrance, stands the throne of the Grand Master. The east is a sacred direction in Masonic cosmology, from where the sun rises and the light of knowledge comes. The throne is set on a 7-step platform, each step symbolizing one of the 7 liberal arts and sciences: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. On either side of the central axis are seats for the officers of the lodge and members of the Brotherhood. The symmetry is absolute. Every element on the right side has a mirror image on the left. This symmetry embodies the Masonic principles of balance and order. The lighting of the temple is designed with special attention to symbolism. Massive bronze and crystal chandeliers create a soft, diffused glow, reminiscent of the candlelight of ancient lodges. The intensity of the lighting can be adjusted to suit the different stages of the rituals. During moments of initiation, the hall can be plunged into almost complete darkness, and then suddenly burst into light, symbolizing the transition from the darkness of ignorance to the light of knowledge. The walls are decorated with panels of rare woods with inlays. Here you can see oak, walnut, and mahogany, carefully selected and processed by master cabinet makers. The wooden panels alternate with marble inserts. Various types of marble are used: white Carrara, green serpentine, red Verona, creating a rich color palette. Memorial plaques on the walls list the names of Freemasons who fell in World War I. The lists are organized by year and division. Reading these names makes a deep impression. Hundreds and thousands of brothers united not only by war, but also by their membership in an ancient brotherhood. The Masonic Museum, located in the building, contains a unique collection of artifacts. Here you can find 18th century aprons embroidered by hand with silver and gold, ritual swords and staffs, ancient books of rituals, and portraits of prominent Freemasons, including royalty. Of particular interest are items that belong to famous historical figures who were Freemasons. You can see the apron worn by King Edward VII, Winston Churchill's regalia, and artifacts from lodges founded in the 18th century. The Freemasons' Hall Library contains more than 75,000 volumes, including rare editions from the 17th and 18th centuries. It is the largest collection of Masonic literature in the world. It houses manuscripts of rituals, personal correspondence of famous Freemasons, lodge documents, and archives of the United Grand Lodge dating back to 1717. Researchers from all over the world come to work with this collection. Freemasons' Hall is not hidden from the public. The building is open for tours, with regular tours during which guides show visitors the Grand Temple and talk about the history of Freemasonry. The museum is also open to visitors. This openness contrasts with the common perception of Freemasons as a secret society. In the 21st century, British Freemasonry seeks to dispel myths and demonstrate transparency. The organization publishes annual reports, is active in charity work, and openly discusses its history and principles. However, the rituals themselves remain closed to the uninitiated. Only members of the Brotherhood know what exactly happens in the Grand Temple during ceremonies. This area of confidentiality is preserved, not as the secrecy of an ominous conspiracy, but as a private spiritual practice which any organization has the right to engage in. The architecture of Freemasons' Hall embodies the paradox of modern Freemasonry. On the one hand, the monumentality of the building, its central location, and its openness to the public demonstrate a desire to be a visible, respected part of society. On the other hand, the richness of symbolism, the complexity of the ritual space, and the closed nature of the ceremonies preserve an aura of mystery and exclusivity. The building stands on the border between public and private, between disclosure and concealment. For those who can read the language of architecture, Freemasons' Hall is an open book of Masonic philosophy. Every element of the design has a meaning. Every proportion carries a message. The temple teaches those who are ready to learn through stone and light, through geometry and symmetry. It is not just a building. It is a three-dimensional manifesto of the ideas that generations of Freemasons have lived by. Similar architectural messages can be found in other capitals. Across the English Channel, in Paris, Masonic symbolism is woven into the fabric of the city in a different, more subtle, sometimes almost imperceptible way. But this does not make it any less significant. When a Freemason enters the Grand Temple of Freemasons' Hall through its massive bronze doors, he crosses the threshold of the everyday world and enters a space where every detail has meaning. 23 temples of various sizes located within the building represent microcosms of the Masonic universe. Each hall is designed according to ancient principles dating back to the legendary Temple of Solomon. The smaller temples can accommodate between 30 and 150 people and are used by private lodges for regular meetings. Despite differences in size, they all follow a single symbolic pattern. Each temple is oriented along an east-west axis. The throne of the master of the lodge is always located in the east, where the sun rises and light comes from. The first guard is located in the west, the second guard in the south. The north remains unoccupied, symbolizing the realm of darkness, from which no sunlight comes. This cosmological orientation transforms each temple into a model of the universe. The lodge meeting becomes a microcosmic reproduction of the macrocosmic order. The Masons, seated along the north and south walls, form the two pillars, the right and left columns of the temple. The central space between them is called the bridge work and symbolizes the path of initiation that each brother takes. Temple interiors are decorated according to different styles and periods, but always include key symbolic elements. The three great lights of Freemasonry are mandatory: the Bible or other sacred text, the compass, and the square. They are placed on the altar in the center of the temple. The Bible is open to specific pages depending on the degree of work. The compass and square are placed on top of the sacred book, in a configuration corresponding to the ritual being performed. Charter documents, which grant the lodge the right to operate, are hung along the walls. The oldest charters are works of calligraphic art with handwritten text decorated with miniatures and coats of arms. Some of them are more than 200 years old. These documents are signed by Grand Masters of past centuries, including members of the royal family. A charter is not just a bureaucratic piece of paper, but a sacred text that legitimizes the existence of the lodge. The walls of the temples are decorated with Masonic symbols made using various techniques. Paintings, wood carvings, bas-reliefs, and stained glass windows create a rich visual environment. The all-seeing eye, the radiant delta, the sun and moon, the seven-branched candlestick, Jacob's ladder, the Ark of the Covenant, and the altar of incense, biblical and esoteric images coexist with masonry tools. The lighting in the temples is specially designed to create an atmosphere of solemnity. In the old lodges of the 18th and 19th centuries, candles were used. Their flickering light created a play of shadows, transforming the ritual into a mystery play. Modern temples use electric lighting, but it imitates the effect of candles. The lights can be dimmed and brightened in accordance with the stages of the ceremony. At key moments, the hall can be plunged into almost complete darkness and then suddenly flooded with light, symbolizing the enlightenment of the initiate. Of particular significance are the two pillars standing on either side of the temple entrance. They are called Jachin and Boaz, the names of the columns at the entrance to Solomon's temple according to the biblical description. The right column, Jachin, means "he will establish," and the left column, Boaz, means "in him is strength." These pillars mark the boundary between the profane world outside and the sacred space of the temple inside. Passing between the columns, the mason symbolically enters Solomon's temple and becomes a participant in an eternal tradition dating back to biblical times. The columns are usually made in the form of pilasters or freestanding pillars about 3 meters high. They are decorated with capitals, upper parts designed in various styles. Jachin often has a Corinthian capital with acanthus leaves. Boaz has an Ionic capital with volutes. In some temples, the capitals are decorated with images of lilies and pomegranates, as described in the Bible. The columns also feature symbols of the earthly and heavenly globes, representing knowledge of the world and the cosmos. Ideally, the ceilings of temples represent the heavenly vault. Traditionally, they are painted blue and sprinkled with gold stars. Some temples have paintings depicting the constellations of the zodiac, symbolizing the cycles of time and the influence of the cosmos on earthly life. In the center of the ceiling, there is often a radiant delta, the all-seeing eye in a triangle. The eye is directed downward, watching everything that happens in the temple. This is a constant reminder of the presence of a higher power watching over the work of the lodge. A checkered floor of black and white marble or stone tiles is a mandatory element of every Masonic temple. This pattern, also called mosaic pavement, symbolizes the duality of existence: light and darkness, good and evil, spiritual and material. Freemasons believe that life consists of alternating opposites, and wisdom lies in the ability to find a balance between them. The black and white squares also represent the equality of all brothers. Each square is the same, regardless of color, just as all Freemasons are equal in the lodge, regardless of social status. The chair of the Master of the Lodge in the east is a throne, often decorated with carvings and symbols. Above it is a canopy, or architectural canopy, reminiscent of royal dignity. The Master of the Lodge is not a dictator, but he directs the work during meetings, just as the Master Builder directed the construction of the temple. His place in the east is associated with the symbolism of the rising sun, the source of light and life. The altar in the center of the temple is shaped like a cube or parallelepiped. Three great luminaries of Freemasonry rest on it. The altar is a sanctuary, a sacred place to which the eyes of all those present are turned. The candidate for initiation takes his vows kneeling before the altar, with his hands on the sacred book. This moment is the culmination of the ritual, when the profane becomes a Mason. Around the altar, in specific positions, are three smaller lamps, called small lights. They represent the sun, the moon, and the Master of the Lodge. The sun rules the day, the moon rules the night, and the Master rules the lodge. These lamps burn during all work, symbolizing the constant presence of the light of knowledge. The walls of temples are often decorated with so-called trace boards, images illustrating the symbols of each of the 3 degrees of initiation. The first degree board shows the apprentice's tools: a 24-inch ruler, a common hammer, and a chisel. The second degree board depicts a spiral staircase leading to the middle chamber of the temple, ears of wheat, and a plumb line. The third degree board contains the most dramatic symbolism: a coffin, a skull and bones, an acacia tree, and the Master's tools. These images are used by the Master of the Lodge during lectures to explain the meaning of the symbols. The attire of the Freemasons gathered in the temple also follows strict symbolism. The basic element is the apron, an apron made of white lambskin or white fabric. The color white symbolizes purity and innocence. The apron resembles the leather aprons worn by medieval Masons to protect their clothes. In Masonic tradition, it has become a sign of Masonic dignity. The shape and decorations of the apron vary, depending on the degree and position of the owner. An apprentice wears a simple white apron without decorations. A journeyman adds 2 sky blue rosettes. A master has an apron with a blue border and additional symbols. Lodge officers and members of higher degrees wear aprons embroidered with gold and silver, with images of compasses, squares, stars, and other emblems. Antique aprons from the 18th and 19th centuries are works of art. They were embroidered by hand with gold and silver thread and decorated with pearls and precious stones. Some aprons contain complex allegorical scenes with dozens of figures and symbols. These relics are kept in museums and private collections, testifying to the importance that Freemasons attached to their regalia. In addition to aprons, Freemasons wear gloves, usually white, symbolizing the purity of their hands and intentions. In some jurisdictions, it is customary to give a newly initiated member 2 pairs of gloves, one for himself and one for the woman he respects most. This is a reminder that Masonic virtues should extend beyond the lodge to a brother's entire life. Lodge officers wear jewelry, metal symbols hanging on colored ribbons over the shoulder. The master of the lodge wears a square on a blue ribbon. The first warden wears a level, the second warden a plumb line. The treasurer wears crossed keys, and the secretary wears crossed quills. Each symbol corresponds to the function of the officer. The rituals performed in these temples remain closed to the uninitiated. However, it is known that they include dramatic reenactments of Masonic legends, the recitation of solemn oaths, symbolic gestures, and movements around the temple. The candidate for initiation undergoes trials symbolizing purification and transformation. He is led through the temple blindfolded, then at the climax the blindfold is removed, and the newly initiated sees the light, a metaphor for enlightenment. Music plays an important role in the rituals. Some lodges have organs or pianos. Special Masonic hymns are performed, many of which were written by famous Masonic composers. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, a devout Mason, composed several pieces for use in lodges. His opera, The Magic Flute, is permeated with Masonic symbolism. Freemasons' Hall in London is not only an active ritual center, but also a museum, library, and archive of the movement's history. Documents recording 3 centuries of British Freemasonry are preserved here. Researchers find evidence of how the ideas of brotherhood influenced politics, culture, and science. Prime ministers and poets, scientists and artists, industrialists and philanthropists were Freemasons. Their activities, inspired by Masonic ideals, shaped the face of modern Britain. Visitors to Freemasons' Hall see grandeur, wealth, and history. Critics may see elitism, secrecy, and a claim to influence. Freemasons see a temple to their tradition, a place where they strive to become better through symbolic lessons. As with Washington, the truth is multifaceted. This building is a monument to the ideas of the Enlightenment, embodied in stone, wood, and glass. It stands in the center of London as a reminder that Freemasonry was and remains part of Western civilization, regardless of how we feel about it. Across the English Channel, in Paris, Masonic history unfolded differently. From the outset, the French Brotherhood was more politicized, more radical, more involved in the revolutionary upheavals that changed Europe. Paris, the city of light, the capital of the Enlightenment, the birthplace of revolutions that changed the world. Here, Freemasonry took on a special character, distinct from the British tradition. While English Freemasons were relatively conservative and loyal to the monarchy, their French brothers gravitated toward radicalism and political activism from the very beginning. The history of French Freemasonry began in the first half of the 18th century, when the ideas of the Freemasons migrated from London to the continent. The first French lodge was founded in Paris around 1725 by English Freemasons living in France. The movement quickly found resonance among the French aristocracy and intelligentsia. By the middle of the century, there were dozens of lodges in the country, uniting thousands of members. In 1773, an organization was created that defined the face of French Freemasonry for centuries to come: the Grand Orient de France. This association of lodges became the largest Masonic organization in the country and one of the most influential in the world. From the very beginning, the Grand Orient differed from English Freemasonry in its more liberal approach to rituals and more active political stance. French Freemasons saw their calling not only in the moral improvement of individuals, but also in the transformation of society based on the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. These three words, which became the motto of the French Revolution, were a Masonic slogan long before 1789. Lodges became places where radical ideas were discussed, absolute monarchy was criticized, and the value of human reason and individual rights was proclaimed. Many figures of the French Revolution were Freemasons. Among them was the Marquis de Lafayette, a hero of the American War of Independence and a moderate revolutionary who attempted to establish a constitutional monarchy. Georges Danton, one of the leaders of the Jacobins, although there is little reliable evidence of his Masonic membership. Duke Philip of Orléans, known as Philippe Égalité, Grand Master of the Grand Orient of France, who voted for the execution of his cousin, King Louis XVII. The revolution itself divided the Masonic Brotherhood. Moderate Masons were horrified by the radicalism of the Jacobin terror. Radical brothers saw the revolution as the fulfillment of Masonic ideals of social restructuring. During Robespierre's reign, many lodges closed. The atmosphere of suspicion and terror made meetings impossible. Robespierre himself was probably not a Freemason, although he shared some of the ideas of the Enlightenment. After the fall of the Jacobins and the establishment of the Directory, Masonic lodges resumed their work. Under Napoleon Bonaparte, Freemasonry flourished. The emperor may have been initiated into the Brotherhood, although this remains a matter of debate. He certainly patronized the lodges and appointed his brothers and marshals to high positions in the Masonic hierarchy. Joseph Bonaparte, Napoleon's older brother and King of Spain, was Grand Master of the Grand Orient. Many of Napoleon's marshals, Murat, Massena, Bernadotte, were members of lodges. Freemasonry became part of the imperial elite, an instrument for consolidating power. Napoleon saw the organized structure of the lodges as a way to control the educated classes and spread French influence in the conquered countries. After the restoration of the Bourbons in 1814-15, the position of Freemasonry became more complicated. The Catholic Church and the conservative aristocracy viewed the Brotherhood with suspicion as a hotbed of Republican ideas. The Pope repeatedly issued bulls condemning Freemasonry and forbidding Catholics from joining lodges under threat of excommunication. However, in France, where the Church was weaker than in other Catholic countries, these prohibitions had limited effect. Many French people combined their Catholic faith with membership in lodges. The Revolution of 1848 and the subsequent establishment of the Second Republic strengthened the position of Freemasonry. The liberal reforms of that period, the expansion of suffrage, freedom of the press, and the abolition of slavery in the colonies, were in line with Masonic ideals. Many leaders of the Second Republic were Freemasons. During the Second Empire of Napoleon III, Freemasonry once again enjoyed official patronage. The emperor appointed his cousin, Prince Lucien Murat as Grand Master of the Grand Orient. Lodges flourished, luxurious buildings were constructed, and lavish ceremonies were held. However, beneath the glamour of the imperial period, contradictions were brewing. Some Freemasons criticized the authoritarian nature of Napoleon III's regime. After the defeat in the Franco-Prussian War and the fall of the Second Empire in 1870-71, Freemasons actively participated in the creation of the Third Republic. This was the golden age of French Freemasonry. The Republic, established in the 1870s and lasting until 1940, was deeply connected to the Masonic movement. Many prime ministers, ministers, and deputies were members of lodges. The Grand Orient de France became a powerful political force lobbying for anti-clerical legislation. A key event was the adoption in 1905 of the law on the separation of church and state. This law, initiated by Masonic politicians, ended the privileged position of the Catholic Church in France. Religion was declared a private matter for citizens. Church property was nationalized. Religious education was banned from public schools. For Freemasons, this was a victory for the principle of freedom of conscience, one of the foundations of their philosophy. For the Catholic Church, it was a catastrophe and confirmation that Freemasonry was the enemy of the true faith. In 1877, the Grand Orient of France made a decision that separated it from Anglo-Saxon Freemasonry. The organization abolished the requirement of belief in the great architect of the universe as a prerequisite for membership. From then on, atheists and agnostics could become Freemasons of the Grand Orient. This was in line with the French tradition of secularism and rationalism, but it caused a rift with the United Grand Lodge of England, which considered belief in a supreme being to be a fundamental principle of Freemasonry. English Freemasons ceased to recognize the Grand Orient as a regular Masonic organization. This schism continues to this day. The Grand Orient went its own way, becoming more politicized and secular. French Freemasonry became increasingly identified with left-wing, anti-clerical, Republican forces. Lodges became clubs for radical politicians. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Grand Orient had about 30,000 members, united in hundreds of lodges throughout France and its colonies. They were doctors, lawyers, teachers, civil servants, military personnel, and entrepreneurs, the educated middle class, the backbone of the Third Republic. They met in Masonic temples, discussed politics, philosophy, and science, and planned reforms. The influence of Freemasonry on French politics during this period cannot be overestimated. The First World War was a test for the Brotherhood. The slogan of international brotherhood collided with the reality of national conflicts. French and German Freemasons killed each other in the trenches of Verdun and the Somme. After the war, the movement for reconciliation and peace found support in Masonic circles, but it was not possible to prevent the next catastrophe. World War II and the occupation of France by Nazi Germany in 1940 brought terrible trials to Freemasonry. The Nazis considered Freemasons part of a global conspiracy and brutally persecuted the brothers. The Vichy government, Marshal Pétain's collaborationist regime, banned Masonic lodges, confiscated property, and published lists of Masons for public shaming. Many French Masons were arrested, sent to concentration camps, and executed. Thousands died. After the liberation of France in 1944-1945, the lodges were revived. Freemasons participated in the resistance and were proud of their contribution to the victory over fascism. But the post-war world had changed. The influence of Freemasonry on politics diminished. new generations sought other forms of social activism. Nevertheless, the Grand Orient de France and other Masonic organizations continued to exist. In Paris, the impressive headquarters of the Grand Orient on Rue Cade, a 19th-century building with luxurious temples and halls, is still in use today. The Museum of the History of French Freemasonry houses relics from 3 centuries. The archives contain documents attesting to the role of the Brotherhood in the country's history. Contemporary French Freemasonry has about 150,000 members in various organizations. The Grand Orient remains the largest, but there are other obediences, including those that recognize the English principle of belief in a supreme being. French Freemasons continue to actively participate in public debates, advocating secularism, social justice, and human rights. They see themselves as heirs to the Enlightenment and the Revolution of 1789. This rich history has left its mark on the architecture of Paris. Masonic symbols are less obvious here than in Washington or London, but they are there. And the most famous of them appeared quite recently, causing a huge scandal. On March 29, 1989, French President François Mitterrand officially opened the new entrance to the Louvre, a glass pyramid in the Cour Napoléon. This 22-meter-high structure, made up of 673 glass segments, immediately became one of the most recognizable symbols of Paris. It also sparked a storm of controversy, rumors, and conspiracy theories, many of which are linked to Freemasonry. The pyramid was part of a grand project to renovate the Louvre, initiated by Mitterrand after his election as president in 1981. The plan was called Grand Louvre and involved transforming the museum into the world's largest cultural institution. The Ministry of Finance, which occupied the north wing of the palace, had to vacate the premises for exhibitions. The problem of the entrance had to be solved. The 3 wings of the palace had separate entrances, which created chaos for visitors. Mitterrand decided to create a single underground lobby connecting all parts of the museum. This required a monumental entrance in the courtyard. Mitterrand personally selected the architect, ignoring international competitions and causing outrage among the architectural community. The architect was Yue Ming Pei, a Chinese-American architect who had already designed several significant buildings in the United States, including the East Wing of the National Gallery in Washington. Pei proposed a bold solution: a glass pyramid in the center of the historic 17th-century courtyard. The project was fiercely criticized even before construction began. Opponents called the pyramid an affront to French heritage, an eyesore, and the madness of Pharaoh Mitterrand. They compared it to the Eiffel Tower, which was also met with fierce opposition when it was built in 1889, but later became a symbol of the city. Members of the French Academy published angry articles. Newspapers were full of caricatures of Mitterrand as an Egyptian pharaoh. Critics pointed to the incompatibility of the modern glass structure with the classical architecture of the Louvre. The pyramid seemed like a foreign body, a spaceship that had landed among the palaces. Defenders of the project argued that the contrast between old and new created a dynamic composition, that the transparency of the glass did not compete with the stone of the old palace, but complemented it. They said that the pyramid solved practical problems for the museum and would become a new attraction. Mitterrand ignored the criticism and personally supervised the construction. He visited the construction site, approved the details, and insisted on his vision. For the president, the pyramid was part of a broader program of architectural projects designed to leave a mark on the history of Paris. Among them were the Bastille Opera, the National Library, and the Defense Arch. These grands projets, large-scale projects, became the hallmark of Mitterrand's 2 presidential terms. Critics called it megalomania. Supporters called it concern for France's cultural prestige. From the very beginning, rumors spread about the pyramid's Masonic motives. The pyramid is an ancient symbol that Freemasons consider one of their emblems. It represents the hierarchy of knowledge, the ascent from the base of ignorance to the summit of enlightenment. The pyramid is depicted on Masonic documents, ritual objects, and architectural elements of lodges. The all-seeing eye is often placed above an unfinished pyramid, as on the reverse side of the Great Seal of the United States. The rumors intensified when it became known that Mitterrand was interested in esoteric teachings, consulted astrologers, and was acquainted with Freemasons. Although the president himself never publicly confirmed his membership in the Brotherhood, many politicians in his Socialist Party were Freemasons of the Grand Orient de France. Conservative Catholic circles saw the pyramid as a Masonic symbol deliberately placed in the heart of Paris to assert the influence of a secret society. The theory about the number of glass panels became particularly scandalous. In his bestseller, The Da Vinci Code, published in 2003, novelist Dan Brown claimed through a character that the pyramid contains exactly 666 glass segments. This is the number of the beast from the biblical Book of Revelation, a symbol of the Antichrist and satanic forces. According to the theory, Mitterrand, a Freemason, specifically ordered this number of panels as a secret message to the initiated. The story captured the imagination of conspiracy theorists and became a fact circulating on the internet. The reality is more prosaic. Official Louvre documents indicate the exact number of panels, 673, of which 603 are diamond-shaped and 73 are triangular. This number was determined by engineering calculations of the strength of the structure, not by esoteric symbolism. Architect Pei, a representative of rational modernism, had no connection to Freemasonry and designed the pyramid solely for functional and aesthetic reasons. Nevertheless, the myth of 666 panels has proven to be enduring. Even after repeated refutations, tourists continue to tell this story. It is too good to give up. A secret Masonic satanic code in the center of Paris, sanctioned by a socialist president. For conspiracy theorists, it is ideal material. The dimensions of the pyramid also give rise to speculation. Each side of the base is 35 meters long. The height is 21.65 meters. The angle of the sides is 52 degrees. Some researchers point out that these proportions are close to those of the Pyramid of Cheops in Giza, albeit on a much smaller scale. Indeed, Pei studied Egyptian pyramids when designing the building. He wanted to create a pure geometric form that was timeless and recognizable. The pyramid is one of the basic forms of human architecture, found in many cultures from Egypt to Mesoamerica. The choice of this form does not necessarily imply a Masonic subtext. From a practical point of view, the pyramid performs its function brilliantly. The transparent structure allows natural light to enter the underground lobby, which covers several thousand square meters. Here you will find ticket offices, a cloakroom, a bookstore, a cafe, and a tourist center. 3 galleries lead to the entrances to the 3 wings of the museum. Richelieu in the north, Sully in the east, and Denon in the south. The system has streamlined the flow of millions of visitors, making a visit to the Louvre more comfortable. Aesthetically, the pyramid created a striking contrast. During the day, the glass reflects the sky and surrounding buildings, changing color from blue to gray. In the evening, the interior lighting transforms the pyramid into a glowing lantern. At night, the illumination creates a dramatic effect. The glass mountain shines among the floating facades of the Louvre. Photographs of the pyramid have become the museum's calling card, appearing in millions of tourist brochures, postcards, and promotional materials. Around the main pyramid, Pei placed 3 smaller pyramids that serve as light wells for the underground rooms. They form a group that creates rhythm and balance in the composition. Fountains with triangular pools surround the complex, adding an element of water. Geometry becomes a theme. Triangles, squares, and circles interact in a thoughtful system of forms. In 35 years, the Louvre pyramid has gone from a controversial innovation to a beloved landmark. Surveys show that most French people are proud of this structure. Tourists from all over the world take pictures against the backdrop of its glass facets. Architects study the project as an example of a successful combination of old and new. Critics have acknowledged the error of their initial assessments. The pyramid has truly blended into the ensemble, becoming an integral part of it. The question remains, was there a Masonic subtext in the choice of form? Mitterrand died in 1996 without leaving a clear answer. Pei denies any symbolic program other than the architectural one. But symbols work independently of the intentions of their creators. For those who see Masonic signs everywhere, the Louvre pyramid is an obvious message. For skeptics, it is simply a beautiful modern building. The truth probably lies somewhere between these extremes. But the Louvre pyramid is not the only one. There is another one that has become the center of even more fantastic theories. Beneath the Carousel Square, a few dozen meters from the main Louvre pyramid, is the Carousel du Louvre underground shopping complex. It houses shops, restaurants, and exhibition halls. And here, in the center of the underground space, hangs an inverted pyramid, a glass structure with its apex pointing downwards. This work by the same architect, Yu Ming-pei, was completed in 1993 as a continuation of the Louvre renovation project. The inverted pyramid serves as a light well, allowing natural light from the surface of the square to enter the underground rooms. Its dimensions are more modest than those of the main pyramid. Its base, with a side length of 16 meters, is at the level of the square, and its apex descends 7 meters. The structure is also made of glass panels in a steel frame. During the day, light penetrates from above, creating soft, diffused lighting in the shopping hall. In the evening, artificial lighting is turned on, and the pyramid glows from within. From an architectural point of view, this is an elegant solution to the problem of natural lighting in underground spaces. The inverted shape creates an interesting visual effect. The pyramid seems to float in the air, its top suspended above the floor. Underneath it, directly on the axis, there is a small stone pyramid, about 1 meter high. This miniature pyramid, pointing upwards, almost touches the top of the large inverted pyramid. There is a gap of several centimeters between them. The 2 pyramids, the large inverted glass one and the small upright stone one, form a composition reminiscent of 2 triangles pointing towards each other. This arrangement did not go unnoticed. In 2003, American writer Dan Brown published the novel The Da Vinci Code, which became a global bestseller with sales of over 80 million copies. The climax of the book takes place right here, at the inverted pyramid of the Louvre. According to the plot of the novel, Professor Robert Langdon, an expert in religious symbolism, deciphers a series of riddles left by the guardians of an ancient secret. The final riddle leads him to the inverted pyramid. Langdon realizes that the small stone pyramid beneath it is not just a decorative element, but the top of a much larger pyramid hidden under the floor. According to the novel, this underground pyramid contains a chamber with the sarcophagus of Mary Magdalene, who is presented in the book as the wife of Jesus Christ and the true Holy Grail. The inverted glass pyramid symbolizes the feminine principle, and the downward-pointing triangle is an ancient symbol of the feminine principle. The stone pyramid pointing upwards represents the masculine principle. Their union at a single point signifies a sacred marriage, a union of masculine and feminine that gives birth to life. Beneath this point, the character claims, lies the body of Magdalene, the guardian of royal blood, whose descendants are still alive today. This story has captured the imagination of millions of readers. Tourists began to come to the Carrousel du Louvre specifically to see the inverted pyramid. They photographed the composition of the two pyramids, search for hidden symbols, and discuss conspiracy theories. The Louvre administration has installed information signs explaining that there is no underground chamber under the floor, that the small pyramid is simply a design element, and that the entire novel is a work of fiction. But for many, reality is less appealing than mystery. The Masonic interpretation of the inverted pyramid links it to esoteric symbolism. The inverted triangle is indeed used in occult teachings as a symbol of the descent of the spirit into matter, the feminine principle, and the element of water. In alchemy, the inverted triangle signifies the element of water. In Kabbalah, it represents the divine feminine principle, Shekinah. Freemasons who studied esoteric traditions were familiar with this symbolism. The combination of triangles pointing towards each other forms a hexagram, a six-pointed star, the seal of Solomon. This symbol has significance in Masonic tradition as a sign of the unity of opposites, the balance of forces, and the harmony of the cosmos. Some researchers see the composition of the two pyramids of the Louvre as an intentional reproduction of this ancient emblem. The problem with such interpretations is that they attribute esoteric motives to the architect without evidence. Yu Mingpei has repeatedly stated that he designed the pyramids solely for functional and aesthetic reasons. The inverted shape is a rational solution for a light well that directs light downward. A small stone pyramid was added to create a visual focus and play of forms. There was no hidden symbolic program. Nevertheless, symbols have a life of their own. Regardless of the creator's intentions, the form carries cultural associations. In Western tradition, the pyramid is associated with Egypt, ancient wisdom, mysteries, and Freemasonry. The inverted triangle evokes esoteric associations for those familiar with occult symbolism. The composition is inevitably read as a message, even if the author did not intend it to be one. This phenomenon is called semiotic resonance. The form activates cultural codes in the viewer's mind. Dan Brown did not invent the symbolism of inverted pyramids. He merely used existing cultural associations, weaving them together with Christian heresies and Masonic legends to create a compelling narrative. The success of the Da Vinci Code showed how appealing conspiracy theories and secret histories are to modern audiences. People want to believe that behind the facade of everyday life, there is a hidden level of reality, that secret societies control events, and that ancient symbols hold forgotten truths. The reality of the Carrousel du Louvre underground complex is simpler and more prosaic. It is a shopping center with fashion boutiques, souvenir shops, and fast food cafes. Tourists rush between the Louvre and the streets of Paris, stopping to buy coffee or take a selfie against the backdrop of the inverted pyramid. There are no underground chambers with sarcophagi. The floor under the small pyramid is ordinary concrete, under which there are communications and technical rooms. However, the myth turned out to be stronger than reality. The inverted pyramid of the Louvre has become a place of pilgrimage for lovers of esotericism and conspiracy theories. It is included in tourist routes to the secret places of Paris. Guides tell stories about Masonic symbols and hidden treasures. Guidebooks on esoteric Paris are published, with entire chapters devoted to the inverted pyramid. All this creates a cultural phenomenon. An architectural object becomes a mythological place. Its physical reality gives way to the symbolic meaning attributed to it. For millions of people, the inverted pyramid of the Louvre is not just a light well in a shopping center, but a gateway to a world of secrets and mysteries. This phenomenon is characteristic of the perception of Masonic symbolism in general. People see signs where they want to see them. The triangle becomes a Masonic symbol, the circle an esoteric emblem, and geometric ornamentation a secret message. Modern society, having lost its religious faith but retaining its need for the transcendent, projects this need onto architecture and symbols. Freemasonry, with its secrecy, rituals, and symbolism, is ideal for the role of conveying hidden meanings. The real story is more complex and interesting than fantastical theories. Freemasons did indeed use symbols and leave them in architecture. But they did not do this for sinister control over the world, but as an expression of their ideas and values. Understanding these symbols requires studying the history, culture, and philosophy of the Enlightenment. This is more difficult than believing in conspiracies, but much more rewarding. The inverted pyramid of the Louvre is an excellent example of how architecture becomes a text that everyone reads in their own way. For an architect, it is an engineering solution. For a tourist, it is a beautiful landmark. For an esoteric enthusiast, it is a secret symbol. For a historian, it is an object of study of cultural phenomena. All these interpretations coexist, creating the multi-layered reality of the modern city. And Paris is full of other places where you can find connections to Masonic history, if you know where to look. Walking around Paris, an attentive observer can find traces of Masonic presence in the most unexpected places. The architecture of the French capital bears traces of 3 centuries of the presence of the Brotherhood of Freemasons. Some signs are obvious, others require a trained eye. In the Place de la Concorde, in the heart of Paris between the Champs-Élysées and the Tuileries Garden, stands an ancient Egyptian obelisk made of pink granite. This is the Luxor column, 23 meters high, weighing over 250 tons, covered with hieroglyphs, 3,300 years old. The obelisk was presented to France by the Egyptian ruler Muhammad Ali in 1830 and installed in the square in 1836. The choice of this particular monument for the center of Paris was not accidental. Egyptomania swept Europe after Napoleon's expedition to Egypt in the late 18th century. Scientists accompanying the army brought back descriptions of ancient temples and pyramids. Champollion's deciphering of hieroglyphics in the 1820s opened up access to the secrets of the pharaohs. Egypt had special significance for the Freemasons. They considered themselves the heirs of the priests and builders of the pyramids, the guardians of ancient wisdom. The obelisk is a traditional Masonic symbol representing the sunbeam and the masculine principle. The installation of a real Egyptian obelisk in the center of Paris was a triumph of Masonic symbolism. The Place de la Concorde itself is full of Masonic references. Its octagonal shape, with 8 statues at the corners representing the cities of France, reflects the Masons' love of geometry and numerical symbolism. In esoteric tradition, the number 8 symbolizes balance and cosmic order. A few blocks to the south is the National Assembly building, the Bourbon Palace, where the lower house of the French Parliament meets. This monumental complex on the banks of the Seine was built in the 18th century and rebuilt in the 19th century. The facade of the building is decorated with a classical portico with 12 Corinthian columns supporting a triangular pediment. Inside the palace is a semicircular meeting hall, where deputies sit in rows, like spectators in an ancient theater. This layout reflects the Masonic principles of equality and fraternal discussion. Many deputies of the Third Republic were Freemasons of the Grand Orient de France, and the building became a kind of secular temple of Republican values. The interior decor is full of allegorical images that can be interpreted as Masonic symbols. The frescoes painted by Delacroix in the Palace Library depict science, philosophy, and law, the central values of the Enlightenment and Freemasonry. On the Champ de Mars, a vast esplanade in front of the Eiffel Tower, stands the Monument to Human Rights. This monument, erected in 1989 to mark the bicentennial of the French Revolution, is a stone structure with bronze bas-reliefs and sculptures. The central element is the text of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen of 1789, engraved on stone slabs. The monument symbolizes a Masonic lodge, a place where brothers meet. Its architecture includes columns, triangular pediments, and geometric shapes characteristic of Masonic temples. The Declaration of Rights, proclaiming liberty, equality, and fraternity, embodies the Masonic ideals that formed the basis of the Revolution. On the Place de la Nation in eastern Paris stands the impressive sculptural group Triumph of the Republic by Jules Delou. The 9.5-meter-high bronze monument depicts an allegory of the Republic on a chariot pulled by lions. She is surrounded by figures representing liberty, equality, fraternity, labor, and justice, values shared by both the Republican movement and Freemasonry. The monument was unveiled in 1899, during the period when Freemasons had the greatest influence on French politics. The sculptor Delou was not a Freemason, but he worked on commission from the Republican government, many of whose members belonged to the Brotherhood. The symbolism of the monument reflects the Masonic ideal of a society built on enlightened principles. The Eiffel Tower itself, a symbol of Paris and France, is linked to Freemasonry through its creator. Gustave Eiffel, the engineer and entrepreneur who built the tower for the 1889 World's Fair, was a Freemason. Although the design of the tower was determined by engineering calculations rather than symbolic considerations, its shape, 4 massive supports converging at a single point, resembles a pyramid. Its height of 324 meters made it the tallest structure in the world at the time of its construction, just as the Pyramid of Cheops was the tallest in ancient times. Some researchers see the tower as a Masonic symbol of humanity's ascent to enlightenment. The four legs represent the four cardinal virtues, and the single peak represents the great architect of the universe. This interpretation is controversial, but it shows how any monumental structure can be interpreted through the prism of Masonic symbolism. The Pantheon, formerly the Church of St. Genevieve, which was transformed by the Revolution into a temple to the great people of France, also has Masonic connotations. This neoclassical building with a grand dome and portico with Corinthian columns became the burial place of outstanding French figures. Among those buried here are Voltaire and Rousseau, philosophers of the Enlightenment whose ideas inspired the Freemasons. Victor Hugo, Émile Zola, and Alexandre Dumas were writers, some of whom had connections to the Brotherhood. Louis Braille, inventor of the alphabet for the blind, was a Freemason. Marie Curie was the first woman to be honored with burial in the Pantheon for her own merits, rather than as a spouse. The building itself, with its central plan, dome, and classical proportions, reflects Masonic aesthetics inspired by antiquity and geometry. The inscription above the entrance, "Aux grands hommes la patrie reconnaissante," to great men, a grateful homeland, proclaims the principle of recognizing merit, regardless of origin, which is in line with Masonic values. The facades of many Parisian buildings from the 19th and early 20th centuries contain decorative elements that can be interpreted as Masonic symbols. These include triangular pediments above windows, rosettes resembling a radiant delta, floral ornaments depicting acacia, and geometric patterns incorporating compasses and rulers. Some of these elements were indeed deliberately placed there by Masonic architects. Others are common classical motifs that Masons later incorporated into their symbolic system. It is often impossible to distinguish an intentional Masonic symbol from a simple classical decoration without knowing the history of a particular building and its creators. The headquarters of the Grand Orient de France is located on Rue Cade in the 9th arrondissement. The 19th century building with a neoclassical facade houses a museum of the history of French Freemasonry. The exhibition includes the aprons of famous Freemasons such as Lafayette, Voltaire, and Napoleon, ritual objects decorated with rich symbolism, portraits, documents, books, and faience with Masonic motifs. The museum is open to the public and offers tours during which you can see the ritual halls and learn about the history of the movement. A visit to the museum debunks many myths about Freemasonry. The exhibits show that the Brotherhood was part of European culture, united educated people of different views, and was involved in charity and cultural projects. There are no sinister artifacts or evidence of a global conspiracy to be found here. This is a museum of social and intellectual history, showing the role of Freemasons in the development of modern France. Napoleon's tomb in the Invalides is an architectural ensemble full of symbolism. The emperor rests in 6 nested sarcophagi under a majestic dome. The round shape of the crypt, the 12 statues of victory surrounding the sarcophagus, the rays of light penetrating through the windows of the dome. All this creates the atmosphere of a sacred space. Napoleon, who may have been a Freemason or at least patronized the Brotherhood, is buried like a demigod in a temple reminiscent of a Masonic lodge. A comparison of Masonic traces in the three capitals reveals different strategies of presence. In Washington, symbols are woven into the very structure of the city, creating geometric patterns in the street layout. In London, Freemasonry openly declares itself with the monumental building of its headquarters. In Paris, the traces are more diverse and subtle, ranging from an ancient obelisk to a modern glass pyramid, from Republican monuments to facade decorations. Each city reflects the history of Freemasonry in its country. The American Brotherhood was part of the revolutionary project of creating a new nation. British Freemasonry evolved into a respectable organization integrated into the establishment. French Freemasonry went through revolutions, conflicts with the Church, and politicization, but remained faithful to Republican ideals. And all this is captured in the stone, bronze, and glass of the capitals. For the modern observer, these symbols can mean different things. For the historian, they are evidence of Freemasonry's influence on Western civilization. For the conspiracy theorist, they are proof of a secret plot. For the Freemason, they are reminders of brotherhood and its values. For the skeptic, they are simply architectural details of no particular significance. The truth is that symbols are ambiguous. They carry the meanings we assign to them. Masonic symbols in the capitals of the world exist objectively. They can be seen, photographed, and studied. But their interpretation depends on who is looking and what they want to see. Masonic symbols on building facades are of particular interest to researchers. Unlike the monumental architecture of public buildings, where symbolism can be random or ambiguous, the decorative elements of private houses and mansions often carry a more personal message. A Masonic owner might have asked the architect to include certain signs that were only visible to initiated brothers. These secret marks served as a way of identifying and expressing membership in the Brotherhood. In Washington, D.C., many 19th-century buildings contain such elements. Houses in Georgetown, the oldest part of the city, display classic federal architecture with brick facades, white porticos, and fan windows above the doors. A careful eye will spot Masonic symbols carved into stone or wood. A triangular pediment above the door with an all-seeing eye in the center. Window keystones in the shape of a square. Ornaments of intertwined compasses and rulers. Some houses have round windows in their pediments called bull's eyes, which resemble the all-seeing eye. The District of Columbia Historical Society has cataloged dozens of such houses, which were owned by prominent Freemasons of the 19th century. The Masonic Temple in Washington on 16th Street is a separate attraction. This massive neoclassical building was constructed between 1911 and 1932 and serves as the headquarters of the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite of the Southern Jurisdiction of the United States. The building, about 50 meters high, is crowned with a pyramidal roof and contains many ritual halls, each decorated in the style of different historical periods and cultures: Egyptian, Greek, Gothic, Renaissance. The facade of the temple is decorated with Masonic symbols without any attempt to hide them. Above the entrance is a double-headed eagle, the emblem of the Scottish Rite. Columns, sphinxes, and allegorical sculptures cover the exterior. It is one of the most overtly Masonic buildings in the world, an architectural declaration of the Brotherhood's presence in the U.S. Capitol. The temple is open for tours, allowing visitors to see the luxurious interiors and collection of Masonic artifacts. In London, in addition to the main Freemasons' Hall, There are dozens of other Masonic buildings. Former and active lodges in Victorian and Edwardian buildings are scattered throughout the city. Many pubs have names with Masonic connotations: Square and Compass, Masonic Hands, Mason and Chisel. These names originated in the 18th and 19th centuries, when lodges often met in taverns before special premises were built. Some pubs still have Masonic rooms on their upper floors. The Royal Exchange, a historic building in central London, contains Masonic symbols in its architecture. Triangular pediments with allegorical sculptures, columns in classical orders, proportions based on the golden ratio, all are characteristic of Masonic aesthetics. The building was designed by architect William Tate in 1844. Although there is no direct evidence that Tate was a Freemason, his work reflects the influence of the Masonic love of classical geometry. St. Paul's Cathedral, although a Christian church, contains elements that Freemasons interpret as their symbols. Architect Christopher Wren, who designed the cathedral after the Great Fire of London in 1666, may have been a Freemason. The evidence is inconclusive, but his membership in the Royal Society, a scientific organization whose members included many Freemasons, makes it likely. The cathedral is built in the shape of a Latin cross, with a massive dome above the crossing. The dome, 111 meters high, dominates the London skyline. Its construction is a masterpiece of engineering and geometry. Inside, the dome is decorated with paintings depicting biblical scenes, but the composition includes geometric elements, circles, and triangles, which Freemasons see as sacred geometry. In Paris, the facades of buildings from the era of Baron Haussmann, who rebuilt the city in the 19th century, are full of decorative elements. The Haussmann style is characterized by uniformity: cream-colored stone facades, balconies with iron railings, and mansard roofs. The decor includes mascarons, sculpted masks on window keystones, floral ornaments, and geometric patterns. Many of these elements can be interpreted from a Masonic point of view. Mascarons often depict mythological characters: Hermes, Mercury, solar, and lunar faces. These images have esoteric significance in the Masonic tradition. Hermes is the patron of science and commerce, the guide of souls, and a trickster. The sun and moon are the great luminaries that govern the lodge. Plant motifs include grapevines, oak leaves, and laurel wreaths, symbols of abundance, strength, and glory that Freemasons have incorporated into their symbolic system. Some buildings have more obvious Masonic signs. The house on Rue Richelieu, built at the end of the 19th century, is decorated with a bas-relief depicting a compass, a square, and the all-seeing eye. The owner was a well-known Freemason of the Grand Orient, and he was not shy about displaying his affiliation. Today, this building attracts tourists interested in Masonic symbolism. The Opera Garnier, a magnificent opera house designed by Charles Garnier in the 1860s, is a triumph of eclectic style, blending Baroque, Classicism, and Renaissance. The facade is covered with sculptures, columns, arches, and gilded details. The interior is even more luxurious, with marble staircases, painted ceilings, and crystal chandeliers. Allegorical sculptures represent music, drama, and poetry. The entire building is a temple to art, created in a spirit close to the Masonic reverence for beauty and harmony. Garnier was not a Freemason, but his work reflects the same aesthetic principles: a love of classical forms, symbolism, and geometric precision. The Opera House became one of the symbols of Paris during the Second Empire, a period when Freemasonry enjoyed the patronage of Napoleon III. The triumphal arch on the Place de l'Étoile, built by order of Napoleon III in honor of the victories of the Grand Army, is decorated with bas-reliefs of battle scenes and allegorical figures. Among the sculptures are images of liberty, victory, glory, and peace, concepts that are also important to Masonic philosophy. The arch has proportions based on the golden ratio. Its height of 50 meters makes it visible from afar, turning it into a landmark. 12 avenues diverge from Place de l'Étoile, creating a radial composition reminiscent of the Freemasons' love of numerical symbolism and geometry. The Sacré-Cœur Basilica on Montmartre Hill, although a Catholic church, was built during a period of Masonic activity and politics. Its white Byzantine style with domes and arches contrasts with Gothic cathedrals. The basilica was conceived as atonement for the sins of the French Revolution and the Paris Commune. The Catholic Church saw the Freemasons as enemies of the faith, and the construction of Sacré-Cœur was, in a sense, a response to Masonic influence. Nevertheless, the architecture uses the same principles of geometry and symbolism. Moscow buildings with Masonic symbols are of particular interest. After Freemasonry was banned in Russia in the 19th century, and then under Soviet rule, the Brotherhood went deep underground. However, buildings from the 18th and early 19th centuries have preserved traces of the activities of Russian Freemasons. The 3 centuries that have passed since the founding of the Grand Lodge of London in 1717 have left an indelible mark on the architecture of Western civilization. The Masonic influence on urban planning and architecture was so profound that it is impossible to completely separate it from the general development of architectural art. The Enlightenment ideals of rationality, symmetry, and geometric purity of form shared by Freemasons became the basis of neoclassicism, the dominant style of the 18th and 19th centuries. Freemasons did not create a separate architectural style, but they were active participants and popularizers of the classical revival. Masonic architects designed buildings in accordance with the principles of Vitruvius and Palladio, ancient masters whose treatises were studied in the lodges. Ideal proportions, the golden ratio, harmony between parts and the whole. These concepts were both architectural and philosophical. Construction was seen as a sacred art, a continuation of the work of the great architect of the universe. In the 19th century, Masonic influence on architecture reached its peak. It was a century of great public buildings, parliaments, museums, libraries, train stations, banks. Many of these structures were designed by Masonic architects for Masonic clients. The buildings became manifestos of progress, enlightenment, and civil liberties, values proclaimed by the Brotherhood. The British Museum in London, designed by Robert Smirko in the 1820s, features a grand neoclassical facade with Ionic columns. It is a temple of knowledge open to all citizens, the embodiment of the Masonic idea of education as a public good. The Library of Congress in Washington, completed in 1897, is a magnificent Italian Renaissance-style building. The interiors are decorated with frescoes, mosaics, and sculptures, glorifying knowledge and culture. Many allegorical images use symbols familiar to Freemasons. 19th-century urban planning projects often reflected Masonic principles of order and rationality. Baron Haussmann, who rebuilt Paris under Napoleon III, created a system of wide boulevards and avenues that cut through the medieval chaos of narrow streets. The result was a city of geometric clarity, where perspectives open up to monumental buildings and squares. Haussmann was not a Freemason, but his work embodied the Enlightenment ideal of orderly space. L'Enfant's plan for Washington, as we have seen, was also based on geometric principles, creating a radial ring structure with monumental axes. This approach to urban planning, the creation of visual axes, symmetrical compositions, and geometric squares, became the standard for capitals and major cities around the world. From St. Petersburg to Buenos Aires, from Vienna to Melbourne, architects applied similar principles. It is difficult to determine how much this was due to Masonic influence and how much to general trends of the era. Freemasons were part of a cultural elite that shared a certain worldview, but they did not monopolize architecture. In the 20th century, the relationship between Freemasonry and architecture changed. Modernism rejected classical forms and ornamentation in favor of functionalism and minimalism. Architect Louis Sullivan's famous slogan, "Form follows function," meant a rejection of symbolism in favor of rationality. Paradoxically, this rationalism was, in a sense, a continuation of the Enlightenment ideals close to Freemasonry. However, modernist architects were rarely Freemasons and did not use Masonic symbols. The exception is special Masonic buildings. In the 20th century, new Masonic temples were built around the world, often in the Art Deco or modernized classicism style. Freemasons' Hall in London, which we mentioned earlier, is an example of Art Deco with classical elements. Similar buildings were constructed in American and European cities. They continued to use traditional symbols, but in updated forms. Masonic temples became a kind of sanctuary for symbolic architecture, at a time when mainstream architectural culture had abandoned ornamentation. Inside these buildings, traditional proportions, decorative programs, and ritual spaces were preserved. From the outside, they may have looked relatively modern, but the interiors remained faithful to the 18th and 19th centuries. This created an interesting cultural phenomenon, a parallel architectural tradition existing alongside the mainstream. Postmodernism in the late 20th century brought back an interest in symbolism and historical references in architecture. Architects such as Robert Venturi and Michael Graves began to use classical elements again, often in an ironic or playful way. This opened up the possibility for a new interpretation of Masonic symbolism. Yu Ming-pei's Louvre pyramid, although not a Masonic project, demonstrates how ancient forms can be reinterpreted in a modern context. The pyramid is both ultra-modern in its glass construction and archaic in its basic form. This duality makes it open to multiple interpretations, including Masonic ones. Contemporary conspiracy theories about Masonic control of the world often focus on architecture. Any building with triangular elements, a pyramidal roof, or classical proportions can be declared Masonic. The headquarters of international organizations, skyscrapers of large corporations, government complexes, all are suspected of concealing Masonic symbols. The reality is more prosaic. Most modern buildings are designed without any symbolic program. Triangles are used for structural reasons. Pyramidal shapes are visually striking. Classical proportions are pleasing to the eye. Architects use these elements without thinking about Freemasonry. However, cultural memory preserves associations, and symbols continue to be interpreted in a certain way, regardless of the intentions of their creators. The legacy of Freemasons in architecture can be assessed from different perspectives. From a historical point of view, the Brotherhood played a significant role in the spread of neoclassicism and the enlightened principles of urban planning. Masonic architects, politicians, and patrons contributed to the creation of monumental ensembles that still define the appearance of capitals. Washington, Paris, London, St. Petersburg, Vienna, all these cities bear the imprint of an era when Masonic ideas were part of the cultural mainstream. From an aesthetic point of view, the Masons' love of geometry and proportion enriched the art of architecture. Attention to detail, symbolic richness, and a desire for harmony created buildings of high artistic quality. Many of these buildings are now protected as monuments and attract millions of tourists. From a cultural and philosophical point of view, the Masonic influence on architecture reflects the broader role of the Brotherhood in shaping the modern world. The ideals of enlightenment, rationality, and progress shared by Freemasons formed the basis of Western civilization in the 19th and 20th centuries. Architecture became one of the ways to materialize these ideas. Critics of Freemasonry point to the elitism and secrecy of the Brotherhood. The symbols on the buildings can be seen as signs of power that is inaccessible to the majority. Freemasons, occupying key positions in society, used architecture to assert their influence. Monumental buildings and entire urban ensembles became the materialization of their worldview, imposed on society. Defenders respond that Freemasons built public buildings, museums, libraries, parliaments, accessible to all citizens. They created spaces for education, culture, and democratic governance. Their contribution to the improvement of cities and the creation of parks and squares improved the quality of life for millions of people. The symbols were not secret codes of conspiracy, but an expression of values that Freemasons considered universal. The truth, as usual, is more complex than one-sided assessments. Freemasons were a product of their time, sharing its prejudices and limitations. They were part of the elite, which gave them opportunities that were unavailable to ordinary people. But they also sincerely believed in progress and enlightenment and tried to put these ideas into practice. Architecture became one of the tools of this project. In the 21st century, Freemasonry has lost its former influence. The number of lodges in Western countries is declining, and the average age of members is increasing. Younger generations do not see the appeal in the rituals and symbolism that seemed important to their ancestors. A secular society, where access to knowledge is unlimited and social connections are established through digital platforms, does not need Masonic lodges as spaces for education and networking. However, the architectural heritage of Freemasonry remains. Buildings stand for centuries, outliving their creators and the ideologies that gave rise to them. The Capitol and the White House, Freemasons' Hall and the Louvre Pyramid, obelisks and triumphal arches continue to shape urban landscapes. They tell stories about people who believed that architecture could change the world, that the right proportions and symbols could ennoble the human spirit. The modern tourist, taking pictures of the Louvre Pyramid or the Washington Monument, probably does not think about Freemasons. For most, these are simply beautiful sights, places for selfies, mandatory stops on a tourist route. But the buildings continue to carry their messages, visible to those who can read the language of architecture. Every column, every triangular pediment, every geometric composition tells of a time when people believed in the power of symbols. Masonic symbols in the capitals of the world are not evidence of a secret conspiracy. They are evidence of a historical era when a certain group of people wielded influence and used architecture as a means of expressing their ideas. These ideas, enlightenment, rationality, brotherhood, progress, proved attractive enough to shape the appearance of entire cities. Today, we live among the material manifestations of these ideas, reinterpreting them in accordance with our contemporary values and fears.